Jai Ma. Om. This video is about Kundalini and diet. I had a long journey with diet and Kundalini. I was always interested in what the optimal diet is to make me feel my best, like flexible, strong, clear-headed, super energized, nourished, glowing, most of all light, not feeling immobilized and heavy. And then later on to feel the divine, to feel Shakti operate through me with as least impediment as possible. When I started to do asana practice, the studio I was going to was also interested in raw food and had many books about raw food. So my journey with asana and my journey with diet pretty much coincided with each other. And I discovered at that point that the less I ate, the more lightly I ate, the more flexible, the more energized I was in yoga practice. So I became a raw foodist unwittingly. Just that's the way it was flowing. And I was going to the Russian banya, the Russian and Turkish baths in New York in the East Village, after my yoga practice and before dinner. Then I started eating almost just exclusively liquid, like raw soups, juices, smoothies, lemonades, no solid food, just yoga, liquid raw food, and sauna, lots of sauna. And pretty quickly, my friends were stopping me on the street and saying, "What are you doing? You look like you've shed 10 years. My waist size dropped back to teenager. I felt great. I looked great. I was just, really exploring my body for the first time, not just in an athletic sense, but in this flexibility asana sense, which I hadn't before. I'd more interested in strength and endurance and conditioning, typical male pursuits. But now that I started with asana practice, I was interested in flexibility. So what was the diet to support that? And I think at that point I had found it. And I started to detox all sorts of stuff, getting my first colonics and my first enemas and green powdered shakes, and just really flushing my system with raw food and just watching everything leave that didn't suit me any longer. I'd say it was a serious cleanse. Although I didn't set out to be a cleanse, it was just what intuitively interested me. So after a while on that liquid raw food diet, I began to have some aches and pains, mostly in my joints. I found myself at the chiropractor an inordinate amount of time, especially for someone who was eating so healthy and doing yoga for 2 hours, 3 hours a day, 6 days a week. So I knew something was kind of off. So thus began a journey to find the equilibrium. And I tried many different ways. I tried with Ayurveda, back to cook food and khichdi and ghee. I tried with Chinese diet, a Chinese medicine influenced diet. Fasting, lots of fasting. So all these things were great. They were great cleanses and they were great learning and information. But it was like many blocks out here on how to put them together day by day for how I felt and how I needed to be nourished and supported. With my diet, was not so clear yet. Sometimes the raw food and fruitarian for a while would be so liberating energetically, and other times I would feel very depleted. Sometimes fasting would be wonderful, and other times depleting. Sometimes eating Ayurveda would be nourishing, and other times it would feel too heavy. Same with Chinese medicine. Sometimes that Chinese medicine diet, which included often animal products, would feel great, and other times again, depleting or too heavy or congesting. Actually, my goal of eating was just to be one with the Kundalini. What diet supported my Kundalini awakening, the Kundalini awakening I was undergoing. So even then I can say, even before my Kundalini was awake, that I was eating to support the Kundalini, or the Kundalini was even telling me what to eat, even though I wasn't aware that that was happening yet, consciously. So I began to dive deeper into these different dietary experiments, seeing how can I get the maximal energy, the maximal nourishment, the maximal chi, the maximal prana, flexibility, strength, endurance, and rejuvenation, or at least maintaining, not decaying. It was only about June of this year, June, July, that I can really say for the first time in this entire journey that I was intuitively eating what my body and the Kundalini wanted. Before then, there was just still a lot of conditioning and programming. What I should and shouldn't eat, what worked in the past, so it should work again. I felt great on a water fast, tried that again, but every time I started to water fast, I'd get terrible migraines and not look very well. Whereas when a couple of years ago, when I did a 21-day water fast, I never felt better. So what I learned was putting everything together. You see, it was a mosaic. And now I really knew from my experiments and my journey and my intuition and discernment and wisdom how to feed this body, this consciousness in this body, as it likes to be fed, when it needs to be fed, when it doesn't need to be fed, what it needs to be fed, what it doesn't need to be fed. And that involved a lot of breaking down of conditioning, because again, I was a raw foodist for many years. I was a fruitarian, I was a vegan, I was a vegetarian. And lo and behold, I found myself eating meat, eating bone broth, because that's what was intuitively being called for. And I had a lot of resistance about it, a lot. It had been a long time since meat was a staple of my diet. And I would have to tell myself, like Kelly, like they slaughter animals at her temples and then they pass it as prasad, so it's got to be okay. But really, it was my body intuitively calling for it. And then there was a period for about 3 weeks where Shakti was singing to me Panchamakara, which is the 5 no's, or the 5 forbidden things in a tantric ritual, one of them being meat. Now, I took it as not a literal interpretation that I had to reenact this ritual, but that energetically I still had walls around diet and all that needed to be broken down, and Shakti was going to break them down. So I started making my own bone broths, then actually eating the meat flesh, and my body needed it for whatever reason. That's what was called for. And then not being attached to that and being able to cycle back off that when I don't feel like it, and then cycle back on it when I do feel like it, and just breaking down all that conditioning around diet. So that's really the whole journey, just like Shakti is breaking down the conditioning around the should, shouldn'ts, have to, coulda, woulda, it ought to be like this, not like this, it ought to be like that and not like that. Kali just takes a wrecking ball to all that, all your conditioning. All of it. For years I didn't drink, then I found myself having some red wine when I had meat. And I gotta say, I was I was worried that eating this kind of tamasic food, this dense food, this animal flesh, would ruin my meditations, because I'd always been experienced with and taught to believe that the lighter I ate, the more I was fasting, the more I ate a live raw food diet, the more connected to Shakti I would be. But actually, no. And in some respects, I can say I connected more deeply with her while eating meat, while eating flesh, while eating bones. Lots of bones. How to explain such a thing? I don't know. It went against all my conditioning. But I opened up to it, and I allowed it, and I allowed the Shakti, the energy, to guide me what to eat and how to eat and when to eat. So for the first time, I'm really like eating without any conditioning, just seeing how I feel, seeing how the body responds to different food, seeing what's called for in different situations, and letting go of any attachment or aversion about anything. Just really, the Kundalini is eating to do its thing, and I'm just there trying to provide, shop for, cook if need be, for the Shakti, for what I feel is the Shakti. Tomorrow it might be that I go back to fasting for 5-6 weeks. That happened recently. And then back to bone broths and back to meat eating. And then later it's back to Chinese medicine or back to Ayurveda. Who knows, man? So the thing is, I'm not a vegan, and I'm not a vegetarian, and I'm not a carnivore, and I'm not my diet. I'm not a raw foodist. I'm not a fruitarian. I'm none of those things. I'm free. I'm free to eat, nourish, commune with any kind of sustenance that this body, spirit is calling for at that time without condition. It's so interesting how the conditioning about spirituality, about everything is also tied into diet so directly. We have so much conditioning around so many things, what it means to be spiritual, what it means to be enlightened, what it means to be self-realized, what it means to have your Kundalini awake or not, what a spiritual diet. No, in my experience, the spiritual diet is giving your body temple what spirit and intuition and discernment are calling for each and every time. That's a spiritual diet. Om.